The hallway carpet was faded, but to Lethan, it felt like the longest road in the world. His muscles ached after a grueling 12-hour shift at the rail yard. In his arms, his 7-year-old daughter, Piper, slept soundly, her small head resting against his worn jacket. All he wanted was to unlock his front door, tuck his little girl into bed, and surrender to the quiet dark. Then apartment 4B swung open. Migi stood in the doorway. She was 38, a quiet woman known across their floor for her warm knitted shawls, freshly baked treats, and gentle, tired smiles. But tonight her face was completely pale. Her breath hitched, and her hands shook violently as her fingers caught the sleeve of Lethan's jacket. "Please," Maggie whispered, her voice trembling with sheer desperation. "Please pretend you are my husband tonight." Lethan froze in place. He had lived across from Maggie for 2 years, sharing nothing more than polite greetings by the mailboxes. But before he could even process her words, he looked past her shoulder. Sitting inside her living room were 2 stern, imposing figures, her wealthy, estranged family who had spent years hunting her down. And now their cold eyes were fixed directly on him. Lethan looked down at the sheer terror in Maggie's dark eyes. In all the months he had seen her tending the hallway plants or offering warm cookies to Piper, he had never seen her look so small. His protective instincts took over before his tired mind could reason. Without a single word, Lethan stepped across the threshold. "I am home, sweetheart," Lethan said. His voice was deep, steady, and filled with an easy warmth he had not used in years. "Sorry I took so long. Piper fell asleep on the ride back." Maggie let out a soft, shuddering breath. Her fingers slipped into the crook of his arm, clinging to his jacket as if he were her only anchor in a rising storm. The 2 people in the room rose slowly from the worn armchairs. They wore tailored wool coats and diamonds that glittered under the dim ceiling lamp. Maggie's older brother, Donald, stared at Lethan's dusty work boots and faded flannel shirt with open disgust. Beside him, her mother, Eleanor, gripped an expensive handbag with tight, disapproving fingers. "So this is the life you ran away to create, Margaret?" Eleanor asked, her voice sharp as broken glass. Hiding in a crumbling building with a common laborer and someone else's child. Lethan did not flinch. He walked gently over to the sofa and laid Piper down, pulling her little coat around her shoulders so she would stay warm. Then he walked back to Maggie. He did not hesitate. He wrapped a strong, calloused arm around her waist, pulling her softly against his side. The sudden heat of his body traveled straight to Maggie's chest. She had spent 5 long years running from her family's suffocating expectations, fighting every day for her quiet independence. Now, pressed against this humble, gentle neighbor, she felt a profound sense of safety she had never experienced in her wealthy past. If you have ever felt the urge to defend someone who had no one else on their side, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of quiet courage. Lethan stared Donald straight in the eyes without blinking. "Her name is Maggie now," Lethan said, his voice dropping to a low, protective growl. "And you are standing in our home. If you came here to insult my wife, you can turn around and walk right out that door." Donald sneered, stepping forward as if to challenge the man in front of him. But something in Lethan's posture made him stop. Lethan was not an elite socialite who fought with polite insults. He was a working man with broad shoulders and knuckles scarred from honest labor. There was a quiet, unshakable steel in his gaze. Eleanor grabbed Donald's arm, her jaw tight with suppressed rage. "You are throwing away your name for this." "Margaret," she hissed toward the kitchen, "you will regret this insult to our family." With a final sharp glare at Lethan, the 2 wealthy intruders walked out. The heavy door clicked shut behind them, leaving behind a silence so thick it felt suffocating. As soon as the hallway footsteps faded, Maggie's knees gave out. She sank against the nearest wall, clutching her chest as tears finally spilled over her cheeks. Lethan did not crowd her. First, he walked to the sofa and gently lifted Piper back into his arms. "I am going to put Piper in bed across the hall," he whispered softly. "I will be back in 2 minutes. Keep your door locked." Maggie nodded weakly, brushing a stray curl of gray-streaked hair from her tear-stained face. Lethan moved quickly. He tucked his daughter into her small bed, wrapped her in her favorite blanket, and turned on the soft nightlight. He set the baby monitor on his belt and returned immediately to apartment 4B. When Maggie opened the door for him, her eyes were red, but her breathing had slowed. She walked to her tiny kitchen to boil water. Her hands were still shaking so badly that the kettle clattered against the stove. Lethan stepped forward and gently took the kettle from her fingers. "Let me," he said in his low, calming voice. Megi sat down at her small, round wooden table. Her apartment was filled with warmth. Soft yellow curtains, hand-stitched cushions, and the sweet smell of dried lavender. It was a home built entirely on quiet simplicity. "My real name is Margaret," she said quietly, staring at her tightly folded hands. "My family controls one of the largest real estate empires in the state. To them, I was never a daughter. I was a bargaining chip. When I turned 33, they tried to force me into a loveless marriage with a cruel business partner. So I ran. I gave up their money, their status, and their name just to have one peaceful day of my own." Lethan set 2 warm mugs of chamomile tea on the table and sat opposite her. He looked at her gentle face, seeing the deep courage behind her tired eyes. "You built something real here, Megi," Lethan said softly. "You have nothing to be ashamed of. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic people to protect your own peace and dignity? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We would love to hear your story." Megi looked up, meeting his warm brown eyes. "And what about you, Lethan? You never talk about why you carry the weight of the world on your shoulders alone." Lethan looked down at the steam rising from his cup. The memory still carried an old ache. Piper's mother left when she was barely 1 year old. She realized she did not want the quiet, boring life of raising a child with a simple rail worker. "Since that day, I promised myself I would never let anyone close enough to hurt Piper again. I work, I come home, and I keep my head down." For the first time in years, the silent barrier between apartment 4A and 4B disappeared completely. They were no longer just passing neighbors. They were 2 lonely souls who finally understood the heavy scars each of them carried. The next morning, the danger did not disappear. When Lethan opened his curtains at dawn, he saw a sleek black sedan parked across the street. Megi's family was not convinced. They had hired private eyes to watch the front entrance of the building. Waiting for any sign that the marriage was a lie, Lethan walked across the hallway and knocked gently on Megi's door. When she answered, her hair was tied back in a loose bun, wearing an oversized knit cardigan. She looked tired, but when she saw him, a soft, relieved smile touched her lips. "They are watching the street," Lethan said quietly. "If you want this to work, we cannot just hide behind locked doors. We have to live like a real family." Megi swallowed hard, but then she nodded with quiet determination. "Then let us show them." From that morning on, the quiet rhythm of their lives changed completely. When they walked down the front steps of the building to take Piper to school, Megi walked beside Lethan. In broad daylight, under the cold gaze of the investigators in the car, Lethan reached out and took Megi's hand. Her fingers were warm and soft against his rough, work-hardened palm. A sudden jolt of electricity rushed through Lethan's chest. Megi looked up at him, her cheeks blushing a delicate shade of rose, but she did not pull away. Instead, she squeezed his fingers gently, leaning just an inch closer into his side. Piper skipped between them, holding Megi's other hand, her sweet laughter cutting through the cold morning air. To anyone watching from the street, they looked like a young family wrapped in complete, unbreakable devotion. As the days turned into weeks, the line between pretending and reality began to blur. Megi no longer spent her lonely evenings in apartment 4B. Instead, the smell of savory stews and fresh cinnamon buns began filling Lethan's kitchen every afternoon. Megi sat at the table with Piper, patiently helping the little girl trace her alphabet letters and braiding colorful ribbons into her hair. Lethan would stand in the doorway after coming home from the noisy rail yard, his boots removed, simply watching them. For 6 painful years, his home had felt cold and hollow, filled only with chores and survival. But now, Megi filled every empty corner with light, warmth, and peace. If you believe that the most genuine love often grows from the quietest, most unexpected acts of kindness, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and leave a like to support our story. One evening, as Lethan prepared to leave for a night shift, Megi walked up to him near the front door. Without thinking, she reached out and gently straightened the collar of his heavy winter coat, her warm fingers brushing against the bare skin of his neck. Lethan stopped breathing. Megi froze too, suddenly realizing how intimate her touch was. Their eyes locked in the dim light of the entryway. Maggie was 38, a mature woman who had known betrayal and fear, but standing this close to Lethan, her heart raced like an innocent schoolgirl's. Lethan looked down at her soft, expressive face, feeling a powerful ache in his chest. He wanted nothing more than to wrap his arms around her waist and pull her against his heart. They were living a dangerous lie, but the fire burning between them was becoming undeniably real. The sweet illusion of safety shattered on a cold, rainy Thursday afternoon. Lethan walked into the building's lower lobby after a long shift, expecting to hear the sound of Piper's laughter echoing from upstairs. Instead, two men stepped out from the shadows near the mailboxes. One was Maggie's brother, Donald. The other was a sharp-eyed man in an expensive gray suit, carrying a thick leather briefcase. Donald blocked the bottom of the stairs with a cold, triumphant grin. "Good afternoon, Mr. Lethan," he sneered. "Did you really think a common rail worker could outsmart our family?" Lethan stood his ground, his broad frame tense and ready for a fight. "You are trespassing. Get out of my building." The lawyer stepped forward, opening the leather folder to reveal a stack of legal papers and private surveillance photographs. Maggie's family had not just been watching their front door. They had used their vast wealth to dig into every private corner of Lethan's life. "We know all about your past," the lawyer said calmly, his voice devoid of any human empathy. "We know Piper's mother vanished 6 years ago. We also know that you never completed the expensive formal court paperwork to finalize sole legal guardianship. You only have temporary status." Donald leaned in close, tapping a heavy gold signet ring against the folder. His eyes were vicious. "Our family has millions of dollars and a team of 50 top attorneys. If my sister does not pack her bags and return to our estate by tomorrow morning, we will destroy you. We will file emergency petitions. We will claim you are raising a child in an unfit, fraudulent environment. We will tie you up in court until Child Services takes that little girl away forever." The air was violently ripped from Lethan's lungs. A cold, suffocating terror gripped his chest. He could endure hunger, grueling shifts, and aching bones. But the mere thought of losing his sweet daughter ripped his soul apart. He had fought so hard to give Piper a safe world, and now, the ruthless power of an elite family was threatening to crush it all to dust. Have you ever been pushed to your absolute limit to protect the ones you love most? If this emotional dilemma touches your heart, please drop a comment below and let us know what you would do in Lethan's shoes. Donald gave a cruel laugh, adjusting his silk tie. "You have until tomorrow morning, rail worker. Give us our sister, or lose your daughter." With that chilling warning, the two men walked out into the pouring rain. Lethan stood frozen in the cold lobby, his head spinning and his breath ragged. He was trapped in an impossible nightmare. How could he betray Maggie, the woman who had brought sunshine back into his empty life? But how could he risk losing Piper, his entire reason for breathing? Trembling with a mixture of rage and terror, Lethan bolted up the 4 flights of stairs. He needed to see Maggie. He needed to figure out a way out of this trap. He reached the 4th floor and threw open the hallway door. But when he looked down the corridor, his heart dropped straight into his stomach. Apartment 4B was wide open. Standing in the center of the dim room was Maggie, wearing her old heavy coat. At her feet sat 2 large packed suitcases. She had been listening by the stairwell the entire time. Her eyes were red with silent tears, and in her trembling hands, she held a one-way train ticket back to the family prison she had spent 5 years running from. The sound of rain pounded violently against the living room window, matching the frantic rhythm of Lethan's heart. He stepped past the threshold of apartment 4B, staring at the worn suitcases sitting near Maggie's boots. "Put them down, Maggie," Lethan said. His voice was cracked, raw with a pain he could no longer hide. "You are not leaving." Maggie kept her head bowed. Her shoulders trembled under her thick coat. "I heard Donald down in the stairwell, Lethan. I heard every single word. They will hire lawyers to take Piper away from you. I will not let my toxic past destroy your innocent daughter. If I go back, they will leave you alone. And what happens to you?" Lethan stepped closer, his boots heavy against the floorboards. "You spend the rest of your life trapped in a cold mansion, married to some cruel stranger you despise. You give up everything you fought for. It does not matter what happens to me," Maggie cried out, finally lifting her tear-drenched face. Her dark eyes were red, swollen with days of silent grief. Piper's safety is all that matters. You gave me a taste of a real family, Lethan. You gave me the warmest 3 weeks of my life. That is more than I ever deserved. Now let me protect you." Lethan closed the distance between them until he was standing inches away. He looked deep into her eyes, searching for the truth beneath all the lies and pretense. "Was that all it was to you, Maggie?" Lethan whispered, his chest aching with a desperate vulnerability. "Just 3 weeks of playing house? Was any of it real? When you held my hand on the street, when you fixed my coat, was that all just survival?" Maggie covered her mouth with both hands, letting out a shattered sob. The weight of her secret became too heavy to carry any longer. "No, Lethan," she wept, shaking her head. "I did not grab you that night by accident. I have watched you for 2 whole years. I watched you carry your sleeping daughter up 4 flights of stairs after 12 hours of hard work. I watched you fix the drafty hallway windows so the elderly neighbors would not catch cold. I baked those cookies every Sunday just to have an excuse to hear your deep voice say hello." She reached out, her trembling fingers lightly touching the front of his flannel shirt. "I did not choose a random neighbor that night," Maggie confessed, her voice barely a whisper through her tears. "I chose the only man I have ever trusted. I chose the man I have silently loved from across the hallway for over a year. If you have ever kept your true feelings hidden because you were afraid of being hurt, please share this video with someone you love and subscribe to our channel for the final chapter." Lethan's heart stopped. The world around him seemed to vanish into pure silence. Without a word, he reached into her coat pocket, pulled out the one-way train ticket, and tore it in half. He dropped the pieces to the floor, then reached up with his rough, warm hands and gently cradled her wet cheeks. "I am not letting you go, Maggie," he whispered against her forehead. "Not tonight. Not ever." He leaned in, his lips just inches from hers. But before their breath could meet, a violent crash echoed down the hallway. Heavy fists began pounding against the outside door of apartment. 4B Donald had not waited for morning. He had brought his private security guards up the stairs tonight. Determined to take Maggie away by force, the heavy wooden door rattled violently against its hinges. Donald's muffled, furious voice barked orders from the outside corridor. Lethan did not hesitate. His fear for Piper and his fierce love for Maggie washed away every trace of doubt. He gently pushed Maggie behind his back, shielding her with his broad frame. Then, with a steady hand, Lethan unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door wide open. Donald stood in the hallway, flanked by 2 burly security guards in dark suits. His face was twisted with arrogant triumph. "Step aside, rail worker," Donald spat, raising a gloved hand toward Maggie. "Margaret is coming home with us right now. Do not make this ugly in front of your neighbors." Just then, the door of apartment 4A across the hall clicked open. Little Piper stood in the doorway, wearing her oversized dinosaur pajamas and clutching her favorite stuffed bear. Her wide, innocent eyes darted between the aggressive strangers and her father. "Daddy?" Her small voice trembled. "What is happening?" The moment Maggie saw Piper's terrified expression, something inside her changed forever. The submissive, frightened socialite who had hidden for 5 years died in that very instant. Maggie stepped out from behind Lethan's shoulder. She did not run to hide. Instead, she walked straight past Donald, dropped to her knees in the hallway, and gathered Piper tightly into her arms. "It is okay, my sweet girl," Maggie whispered against Piper's hair, kissing her forehead with fierce, maternal tenderness. "You are completely safe. Maggie is right here." Donald scoffed, stepping toward them. "Enough of this circus. Guards, grab her." Lethan took one powerful step forward, planting his boots firmly between Donald's men and the 2 people he cherished most in the world. His hands balled into tight, white-knuckled fists. "Take one more step toward my family," Lethan said, his voice dropping into a dangerous low rumble that shook the quiet air, "and none of you will walk back down those stairs." The 2 guards hesitated, glancing nervously at each other. They were paid to intimidate quiet people, not to fight a hardened rail worker whose eyes burned with the fury of a protective lion. Suddenly, another sound broke the tension. Down the corridor, doors began opening one by one. Old Mrs. Gable from apartment 4D stepped out into the hall, leaning on her wooden cane. Behind her, the young mechanic from 4C and the elderly couple from 4F opened their doors. They were working-class neighbors who had lived beside Lethan for years. They knew the long hours he worked to feed his daughter. They knew Maggie's sweet soul and the warm bread she brought them on lonely winter mornings. Several neighbors raised their smartphones, the bright recording lights shining directly onto Donald's pale face. "We are watching you," the mechanic called out firmly from his doorway. "The police are already on their way up the front steps." Donald looked around the hallway, his cold confidence beginning to fracture. He was accustomed to dark boardrooms, where wealth bought absolute obedience. He had never faced the united strength of honest people who looked out for their own. Maggie rose to her feet, holding Piper securely on her hip. She turned to face her brother, standing tall and proud beside Lethan. For the first time in 38 years, her voice did not tremble in the presence of her family. "Look at me." "Donald," Maggie said, her clear voice ringing across the fourth-floor corridor, "I am not your little sister Margaret anymore. I gave up your millions, your empty titles, and your suffocating rules 5 years ago. I built an honest life in this building, and I will never go back to your gilded cage." Donald gritted his teeth, his eyes flashing with desperate venom. "You are throwing your life away for a beggar and a child that is not even yours. We will ruin him in court." "No, you will not," Maggie replied with cold, unbreakable authority. "Because if you file a single fraudulent petition against Lethan, I will call every news outlet in this city. I will give them 20 years of financial records showing how your empire hides its money. I will destroy your reputation before your lawyers can even print a single document. Now take your men, leave this building, and never show your face near my family again." Donald's jaw dropped. He stared at his sister as if looking at a total stranger. He realized in an instant that her spirit was no longer broken. She was completely free, and he held zero power over her. With a humiliated curse, Donald turned on his heel. "Let's go," he snapped at his guards. The 3 men hurried down the stairwell, their heavy footsteps fading into the rainy night until the heavy street door slammed shut below. The hallway fell into a stunned, breathless silence. Then, Mrs. Gable gave a gentle, approving nod and quietly closed her door, followed by the rest of the supportive neighbors. If this incredible moment of courage and standing up for true love touched your soul, please take a moment right now to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that love always conquers fear. Lethan closed the apartment door and locked it tight. He turned around, his chest heaving as the adrenaline slowly ebbed away. Piper yawned softly in Maggie's arms, her eyelids heavy with exhaustion. Maggie carried the little girl into the bedroom across the hall, gently tucking her beneath the blankets and kissing her cheek until she drifted back into a peaceful sleep. When Maggie walked back into the living room, Lethan was waiting for her near the warm yellow lamp. The room was quiet, filled only with the soft sound of rain tapping against the glass. Lethan looked at her, his eyes filled with an overwhelming tenderness. "You were magnificent tonight, Maggie." Maggie smiled softly, a tear of pure relief trailing down her cheek. "I had something worth fighting for." Lethan took a slow step forward, closing the space between them. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, simple silver band that had belonged to his grandmother. It was not adorned with expensive diamonds, but it was forged from pure, enduring metal. He took Maggie's right hand into his rough, warm palm. "3 weeks ago, you knocked on my door and asked me to pretend," Lethan whispered, his deep voice thick with emotion. "You asked me to play a part so you could survive the night. But these past 3 weeks have been the most beautiful days of my life. You brought sunshine back into this home. You gave my daughter a mother's gentle love, and you gave me a reason to smile again." Maggie's breath caught in her throat. She looked down at the simple silver ring, fresh tears shimmering in her dark eyes. "I do not want to pretend anymore, Maggie," Lethan continued, dropping to one knee before her, holding her hand against his racing heart. "I do not want to hide behind a convenient lie. I want to love you openly, proudly, and with every beat of my heart. I want to build a real life with you, through every hard shift, every quiet morning, and every passing storm. Maggie, will you marry me for real?" Maggie let out a broken, joyful laugh as the tears poured freely down her face. She fell to her knees beside him, wrapping her arms around his broad neck and pulling him tight against her chest. "Yes," Maggie whispered against his ear, her voice filled with pure, uncontainable happiness. "Yes, Lethan, 1,000 times yes." Lethan slid the silver ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He cradled her soft face in his calloused hands and leaned in, pressing his lips to hers in a tender, passionate kiss that sealed away the years of loneliness, fear, and pain. From that rainy night forward, apartment 4A was no longer just a shelter for a struggling single father and his child. It was a home filled with laughter, the warm scent of fresh baking, and an enduring love that had crossed the hallway to heal 3 lonely souls forever.